Turning now to the federal election campaign, and the Conservatives unveiled a bold plan to help those with drug addictions. Erin O'Toole spent the morning at a drug recovery centre in BC's Lower Mainland. Abigail Bimman has more on O'Toole's plan to tackle the opioid crisis.
Chris Esnard was in a very difficult and dark place a few years ago.
Cocaine. Yeah, a lot of it too. It wasn't a small amount.
It took 2 stints and years at this recovery center to help change Esnard's life. Now his children speak to him again.
I'm the happiest in my life I've ever been. I feel fulfilled. I don't hurt anybody. I don't cause any problems. I'm not breaking the law. My kids want to talk to me. My wife, she's my friend. We can talk again. We can parent our kids together. I didn't have those opportunities before.
I don't think someone with an addiction should be punished. I think they should be helped.
With a plan much more left-leaning than Conservative leaders past, Erin O'Toole is promising more centres like this one. $325 million for 1,000 new beds and 50 recovery centres. $1 billion for Indigenous mental health and addictions, and free access to naloxone kits across the country. And he said he wouldn't shut down safe injection sites.
First of all, the announcement is fantastic. So far out of all the federal parties, the Conservative Party is the first one to actually talk about recovery and wellness along with consumption sites.
But O'Toole wasn't clear on support for decriminalization of small amounts of harder drugs. The City of Vancouver is currently working on a plan for that.
We'd like to see more judicial discretion here to get treatment options for people with an addiction and not have them held back in their recovery and future employment by a criminal sanction. And I have a lot of faith that the court can balance off those factors.
And while the promises may sound a little more orange than blue, the NDP and some harm reduction advocates say it doesn't go far enough.
We believe that the approach needs to be to declaring a public health emergency, to taking on Big Pharma.
Really what you have to look at is people are dying from toxic drugs, and they need access to safer regulated drugs.
Conservatives head back to Ottawa now, wrapping their first week on the campaign trail with several announcements like this one aiming to target more progressive voters. And early polling shows it may be working, with the gap between Conservatives and Liberals shrinking. Jeff?
Abigail Bimman in Richmond, BC tonight. Thanks, Abigail. The NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, spent today in Toronto, paying tribute to a man who made history before his life was cut short. Today marks 10 years since Jack Layton passed away from cancer, just months after he led what became known as the Orange Crush, winning 103 seats in the 2011 election and becoming the country's official opposition. To commemorate his legacy, Singh wants to see Layton's home riding renamed in his honor. Mike Couture explains.
When Jack Layton died 10 years ago, chalk messages of condolences filled the walls of Toronto's Nathan Phillips Square. So it was fitting, on the anniversary of the former NDP leader's passing, the current leader came here to add his own tribute.
We are going to carry the torch for you. So we are going to keep on fighting for that vision that Jack had of a better Canada, of a better world.
Layton propelled the NDP to historic heights in 2011 during the Orange Wave. The party won 103 seats, making the NDP the official opposition. Singh has invoked the late leader's memory many times in the first week of the campaign, and he went even further Sunday, announcing after the election he will introduce a bill in the House of Commons to rename Layton's former riding from Toronto-Danforth to Danforth-Layton in memory of Jack, a move some believe could be politically opportunistic in the middle of an election campaign.
It's appropriate and an important time. 10 years later, I wanted to contribute something to remember Jack, to remember his legacy, to remember what he's done. And it's not without precedent. We've seen this for other notable members of parliament or notable political leaders that ridings have been named in their honor.
There are a number of ridings named after historic political figures, including Justin Trudeau's riding in Montreal, which is named after Joseph Papineau, who was a political figure in the 1700s.
Hello.
Jack Layton's son Mike is a city councillor in Toronto. He sees the renaming as an honor, not political.
While he didn't live in that riding, he worked for that riding and for the people of that riding for a lot of years. It's certainly a lovely gesture to be made to the family and to Jack's legacy.
Noticeably missing from the event was Layton's widow and former NDP MP Olivia Chow. Now, party officials tell us she wanted to spend the morning alone, but Chow will be attending a virtual concert this evening celebrating Layton's legacy. Jeff?
Mike Couture traveling with the NDP in Toronto. Thanks, Mike. This election campaign is swapping shaking hands and kissing babies with elbow bumps and virtual town halls. The pandemic is changing how leaders get their message in front of Canadians. Global News is going behind the scenes with party leaders to see how they're conducting the campaign in a time of COVID. Our Mike Couture is on the road with Jagmeet Singh's NDP, and here's his reporter's notebook from the campaign trail.
What a difference 2 years makes. On day one of the campaign, Jagmeet Singh hopped on his chartered plane to crisscross the country. Compare that to 2019, where it took nearly 2 weeks for the NDP leader to leave his bus tour of the greater Toronto area. But while he's getting to more places, he can't necessarily get as close to people because of the pandemic. COVID-19 has forced all leaders to adapt. The hugs and handshakes have been replaced with elbow bumps and waves. It's a challenge for politicians like Singh who thrive in close quarters.
I would love to be in big crowds and enjoy that energy. So we're going to have to do things differently, but we'll adapt. Oh my goodness, comment ça va?
And clearly adapting takes a bit of time, especially when Singh's first event of the campaign was marching in the Montreal Pride Parade, where personal space was at a premium. It's forcing all parties to conduct hybrid campaigns.
I hereby declare.
His nomination meeting, which would have seen a huge rally in his Burnaby riding, was instead virtual from a Vancouver hotel.
Stop lying to Canadians, Jagmeet!
Public events do have some pitfalls, as the NDP learned the hard way in Toronto.
Hi.
And Singh still tries to get out and connect with voters, pounding the pavement with his candidate, looking for votes. There has been one large crowd, that was in Edmonton, and Singh clearly craves more of it.
Flower on the hands. Yeah.
Despite the limits of pressing the flesh, Singh is rolling forward, hoping to flip ridings that went to the Conservatives and Liberals in 2019. Some party sources estimate they could gain up to 12 new seats, while others are even more ambitious, believing double that number of ridings are well within reach. A far cry from the 2019 campaign, when the goal was to limit the damage and limit the number of seats they knew they were going to lose. Mike Couture, Global News, Toronto.